Okay, so in this video, I want to show you how ACES is really comes in handy when you're dealing with footage, and specifically when you're dealing with footage mixing with CG. Okay, so here we are in Fusion, and I've got a background plate that was shot in LOGc. So I've got a DPX image here of our background plate. This is what it comes in looking like in log. And typically the way I would work is I would probably convert this to a Rec 709 or sRGB to get it into a place that sort of matches what I'm doing in a sRGB workflow in Cinema. So again, this is sort of the raw LOGc plate, but then I have to change it and put it into this Rec 709 or sRGB space and sort of bake in all of this information. I would typically, in the past, render out this as a PNG sequence or an 8-bit sequence, right? But the problem when you do that is this. So let's just go ahead and say that I exported out this plate to work with it in 3D. And we're going to open up Cinema now. And I've got this plate going in Arnold here. I've got a very simple background using a lot of matte shadow materials and whatnot, but I'm not going to get into the specifics of how I set this shot up. But if there's anything specific you want to know about this workflow, maybe we'll do a deeper dive on the live action component of doing this sort of thing. All right, so typically you'd bring this in as a background plate, and let's just go ahead and find where I have that. And in our case, all right, I'm just doing some stuff with the alpha here. But all right, so here it is, and here's our render. There you go, right? Well, here's the issue. Because this is 8-bit, if I start to take the, I'm going to take the camera and just bring the exposure up of the entire shot. And you're going to quickly see the limitations of working in sRGB is that our 8-bit PNG that we converted from log of the background plate completely falls apart when I bring the exposure up on our camera, as does the color on our car. So if we bring this back down, we've got no dynamic range. Now we could export this out as a, bring it into Fusion and export it out as like a DPX sequence, 10-bit, or maybe even an EXR sequence, but you don't have to do that with ACES. And that's the beauty of ACES, is because you can interpret many different formats and make them work all in ACES and then export them out in any flavor you want. Okay, so what does that look like? All right, well, this next scene I'm going to open, I'm going to show you how that looks. Okay, so here we are in a scene. I haven't loaded the background plate in, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to do that by just going to Arnold, Texture, Image, and we're going to load in our background plate. Let's jump out to where we have that. Right here, Elements, Footage, and now we can just pick this DPX file. We don't want to insert that. Okay, so now we're dealing with a LOGc image. And we don't have to convert it because it's ACES. So all we need to do is go to the color space and find the color space in which this was shot. And I know this was shot in RE LOGc, ISO of 800. So let me just find that. And for whatever reason, my brain is unable. There it is at the bottom. Okay, so now we've interpreted our color space the correct way. Now we need to plug this in everywhere that we're using this background plate. So I'm going to come down to Image. This I know is being piped into the background. So I'm just going to use this as a reference. I'm just dragging in my image node here, and we're going to go ahead and plug this into the color. All right, so now that's in our background, and I'm going to do the same thing to our matte shadow. I'm just going to drag it in as a reference and pull that off to the side, and this is going to go into my camera projection color. All right, so literally, that's all you really need to do. I was already working in ACES in the scene file, so it wasn't a huge deal. Now, this is great because that means that you can get sources from many different cameras and bring them into the same working space and then output them as linear EXR, bring them into the comp, and now you're working in ACES in the comp, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. But here's the benefit. You remember that 8-bit scene with the background plate before, and when I adjusted the exposure, it just didn't feel realistic. The highlights blew out super fast. The blue looked insanely bad. So let's see what this looks like in ACES CG. So I'm just going to bring this exposure up, and you can see it's the plate is exposing correctly, and the CG element is sitting perfectly in the plate. So it really, really works well. We can just continue to blow this out. it just works. It's such a better way to work. All right, so let's just bring the exposure way down, and you can see we're maintaining the dynamic range of that DPX plate. And again, you don't have to, the other method showing it non-ACES, I baked it out to a PNG 8-bit, probably not the best thing to do, but I just wanted to kind of show you this way in comparison to sort of like the old way that I would sometimes do this. This is just so much better. Okay, so then you're asking like, okay, well, how does this work? Well, I typically will render it out like this. I'll render out the CG element and some mats for the ground and things like that. I'm not going to get too deep into that workflow. But I'm going to show you now this render in Fusion, and we're going to bring in the CG render, and we're also going to bring in that plate, and we're going to make it all fit in the same workspace in Fusion. So let's check that out. Okay, so here we are in Fusion, and we've got our ACES CG plate already comped. I'm going to walk you through that in a minute. And we've got the sRGB version. So this was sort of like an older workflow that I would have done, you know, sort of render it out, bring in the maybe the color corrected plate, or at least the plate that's been converted from log to linear. And this is the difference. All right, I'm just going to throw the same color correction on both of these plates, and I'm just going to bring the gain up in both of these plates. And you're going to notice that the one on the left is just going to react more realistically, whereas the one on the right just completely falls apart so much faster than an ACES CG workflow. And I actually should point out that I'm actually not working in ACES CG here. I'm actually working in ACES CC, but whatever, it's fine. I'll tell you how that works in a second. All right, so you can see the benefits here. If I bring the exposure down, we're getting a lot more of that filmic response. And if we bring it up, it just feels like the CG element is sitting in the plate more, whereas this starts to feel like an unrealistic saturation on the blue. It just tends to look kind of gross. So let's talk about what I'm doing here. All right, let's break this down for a sec. I'm going to just split out this this loader down here so we can start fresh, so that you can see what's going on. Let's zoom in here. All right, so let's go to a single view. I'm going to pull this in. So this is my raw render. Let's actually look at it without the checkerboard underlay. All right, and the alpha is going to look like that. All right, so right now it's just a linear EXR. Fusion doesn't really care or know what it is in terms of color space. So we need to decide that for ourselves. So we know that we made this in ACES CG. So let's just grab a color space, OCIO color space. We'll drop that down, connect that in there. Now all we have to do is come over to our config file and find the exact same config file we've been using. So there it is. All right, what was our source space? Well, our source space was ACES CG. That's what we rendered this in. And the output space, like your brain would be like, oh, let's work in ACES CG. That's not really what you should do. We're not in CG anymore, so you want to work in ACES CC, which is kind of like the default ACES space. All right, boom, right there. Let's drag that up into our window, and immediately it looks like log, which is actually what you want. We're not going to work in log, so that's not really going to work for our view, but that's good that we're in this space. That means it's all working. That means that our elements are working correctly. But remember, this is a 3D render. I don't have the background plate in here yet. We need to do that. So let's go ahead and grab our background plate, in this case the DPX file, and here's our background plate. Because it's a DPX file, Fusion is going to want to load it with a log type. I'm going to hit bypass on that. So now we're looking at the raw ARRI LOGc ISO 800, okay? We need to get this into the same space as this. Can we just comp it like this? Well, no, I don't really want to do that. I want to bring it into ACES CC. So I'm going to copy this node and paste it down here and plug that in. And I'm going to change this. We know the space is not going to be ACES CG because that's not what this was shot in. It was actually shot in ARRI LOGc with an ISO of 800. So there we go, input LOGc ISO 800. There we go. Let's look at that. All right, now we are currently working in ACES. We are comping in ACES. Anything that happens after this is in ACES. So we can just merge these guys together, and let's go ahead and turn off any sort of attract or additive gain on that. and we're going to use the alpha. Actually, it should be fine. All right, so now we're comping in ACES, and let's go ahead and throw in maybe a color correct. And I bet you're saying, like, well, is this how you have to work? Like, do you have to work looking at it like in this log view, which looks terrible? No, it's the same things that we talked about in the last video. And if you haven't checked that one out, be sure to check that one out. We can choose to use a view LUT, or we can actually output it at the end of my comp. I prefer to sort of like have an output device transform at the end, so I'm just going to copy this entire color space node, plug it in at the end over here. This one we know that's coming in as ACES CC, right? Because we went from ACES CG and LOGc. We brought it into ACES, and now we're going to give it an output device transform from ACES CC to out. Let's see if I can scroll forever here. Out sRGB. All right. So there you have it. Now we have a complete ACES workflow comp. In fact, we can do the exact same thing that we did earlier. We can bring that exposure up and down and do all that crazy stuff that you want to do. We could boost the saturation by quite a bit if we wanted to, and it's going to hold together. It's going to feel like it's married in the plate there. All right, so yeah, let's just go over this one more time. All right, we had a linear EXR file coming out of Arnold that was rendered in ACES CG. So we transformed ACES CG into ACES CC. And then we had a background plate that came from an Arri LOGc at 800 ISO. So we brought that in and we said, okay, whoop, I actually didn't change this. This should have been input. Good thing we did this. Let's go. There we go. All right, so that's correct now. For some reason, that was not the source space was incorrect. And all right, let me just double check these guys one more time. Oh, you know what? I had it flipped, and that's why I got screwed up. So that's going to be that. All right, cool. So my CG plate, source space is ACES CG, output space ACES CC, background plate, source space Arri LOGc 800, output space ACES CC. They get married together. I do a little color grade on it, and we bring it out to our ODT, output device transform, to sRGB. Now, this could also be Rec 709. It's not really going to be that much of a difference. It depends on what your output is. I tend to use Rec 709 for the most part. Okay, so let's go ahead and just like play that again. Let's just go ahead and bring that saturation back down. Nice. All right, so that's kind of the idea here, is that the beauty of working in ACES is that you can bring in sources from anywhere, work in the same color space, and then go out in a predictable way. And that's really the benefit, not only just the way that it looks in ACES CG when you're rendering in Arnold, but your entire workflow. If you're doing a lot of live action stuff, this is a great way to work. It's going to make it easier to marry stuff into live action plates coming from different sources and whatnot. And yeah, so that about does it for this particular video. Make sure if you skipped around, you didn't watch all the other videos, I highly recommend watching all the ACES tip videos, because it really helps understand the broad spectrum of what ACES can do. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have any questions, hit me up in the GSG Connect Slack and the Plus channel, and I will see you next time.